Hello and welcome back to this series on Shopify Hydrogen, Shopify's React-based framework for building dynamic Shopify-powered custom storefronts. In the last video, I mentioned my full Skillshare class on Shopify Hydrogen, which is a class that loosely follows the text-based tutorial on Shopify's official website. I believe it's always a good idea to study the official tutorial, even if it might be a little hard to follow, because it gives us an idea of how the original developers, Shopify in this case, recommend using the framework. To keep it simple for the Skillshare class, I decided to keep just the core dependencies of React, Hydrogen, and Vite for the class project, but within the official Shopify tutorial, Shopify recommends a package called Tailwind CSS. It's a CSS framework that offers developers a set of guardrails by providing a limited set of spacing, color, and responsive layout utilities. So in this video, we're going to take a Hydrogen project with standard pure or plain CSS, replace the styling with Tailwind, and in the process, learn how to use this powerful framework to help us transform the way we write CSS in the context of a Shopify Hydrogen project. So let's get straight into it. All right, so the code base for this tutorial is going to be my Hydrogen class storefront. You can find this on my GitHub page, /Christopher.Dodd/Hydrogen class storefront. And as it says here, this is a basic Hydrogen storefront based off of the Hello World starting point provided by Shopify. So this project right here is what we build in the full 4-hour Skillshare class. So for those people who have taken the class, this will follow on quite nicely. But for those of you who haven't taken the class, it's still fine, but just understand that a lot of the stuff in here, all the JSX files, you might not fully understand unless you've taken the class or have studied Hydrogen on your own. Now, the thing is, there's a lot of JSX in here, imports, hooks, components from Hydrogen. In this video, we're not going to talk about JSX or the Hydrogen framework at all. All we're going to do is simply plug in Tailwind into an existing project. So if we go back to the Git repository here and go under branches, you'll find that there is a branch called 14-completed code. And with that branch, you can have the completed project. So in order to download and work with this project, if you wish to follow along, you can just click on this green button and then clone via this URL right here. Okay, which is what I've already done. For me, as the creator of this repository, I already have it on my computer and I've opened up the completed code branch. Let's run our development server by running npm run dev so we can see how it looks right now. So I'm going to open up localhost 3000 in my browser. The home page is bare, it's just a heading, but if we go into the catalog page, you can see the list of the first 9 products in our store. And then if we click on any one of these products, we can select a variant, add it to cart, go into the cart page. It is included another variant that I selected previously that must be stored in the cache. But as you can see here, I can increase the quantity, delete the item from the cart. I've also got the freestyle collection here and the blog. Now, if you're wondering where this data is coming from, it's actually coming from the Hydrogen preview. So if we go into our hydrogen.config.js file, you can see here, this is the Shopify store I'm connecting to, which is the preview store that Shopify allows you to connect to. As I wrote in the about section here on the repository, this is based off of the Hello World starting point. So if you run a new project using the Hello World starting point, you will get the same config out of the box, okay? But of course, you can go in here and change this to whatever store you want. Maybe you want to practice on your own store. But the good thing about Hydrogen is you don't even need your own store to start working with it. You can leverage the example store from Shopify themselves. So with the completed code on your computer, I'll close that down and I'll bring your attention to the other 2 tabs. We've got the official Shopify tutorial on how to build a Hydrogen storefront. We'll be using the steps in step 5 to add Tailwind. And I've also opened up in the 3rd tab the documentation for Tailwind CSS, which is very, very good. So if you're trying to achieve something with CSS and you don't know how to write it in Tailwind, you can just search it right here or go into the different headings of this documentation. All right, so if we go back to here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip all of the CSS. So if we go over here to the completed code branch, I'm going to close that down and look at our index.css file. You can see I've written a whole lot of custom classes. I wrote the CSS in plain old CSS, and that's what's giving the styling we have now. But in this video, what we're going to do is use Tailwind. So I'm going to strip all of the CSS here. I'll hit save on that, and if we go back, this is what our page looks like with no CSS. Complete mess. The images and icons are just too big. The menu items look like regular HTML links from 1995. You know, it's a mess, right? So we will fix this in this video with Tailwind CSS. But the first thing we got to do is install it. And the best place to find information on how to install it within a Hydrogen project is currently right here on the documentation. We're going to scroll down to step 5, add styling. And first we need to stop the development server. So I'll do that. We need to stop this from running. And then what I'm going to do before I go any further, I'm going to actually create a new branch. I'll call this one completed code without CSS. And the reason why I recommend you do this is so that you don't accidentally commit code to the completed code branch and mess that up. So we'll create a new branch and we can commit this to that branch right now. So I'll hit save, and then I'll just say remove all CSS from branch. I'll commit that. Oh wait, we need to stage this, stage, and commit. Okay, cool. Now what we're going to do is create another branch, and I'll call this completed code with Tailwind CSS. Okay, so we've got everything in different branches. Okay, I'll go back to the Explorer over here, and in our terminal, actually we don't need the Explorer. I'll expand this a little bit so you can see a bit clearer. We're going to follow the installation steps. So we already closed down our server. The step 2 is to run this command. We can either run it in npm or yarn. Let's just run it in npm. So I will copy that. I will paste it in here and just hit enter. And then after a certain amount of time, it will have finished installing and we can make some updates to the Tailwind config file. Okay, that was pretty quick. I'm going to clear that and then open up our Explorer right here. Scroll down and you can see here we now have a tailwind.config.js. And then here what we want to do is follow the next step, which is to replace the blank config file with this. So as you can see, we've added some stuff to the content array, and we've added this to the plugins array. This typography package we'll get to a little later in the class. To give you a little preview, Tailwind actually strips all the basic styling that you get out of the box. Like if you have a visited link tag in standard HTML, it's going to show up purple with this underline. If it's an unvisited link, it's going to show up blue. For headings, you've got styling out of the box. So what Tailwind does is strip all of that, but then in certain situations where maybe you're looking at an article, you want to bring back that styling. So the typography package helps you within Tailwind CSS. So we'll see that later when we start to style our article pages. Okay, we'll save that, and then we'll move on to the next installation step, which is to include these Tailwind directives in our index.css file. So I will go into our index.css file here and paste these in, and then I'll hit save. Now I want you to look at what happens here, because I mentioned this is all standard CSS stuff. If I go in here now and I run npm, let's close down this Explorer, npm run dev now with the config updated and the directives in there. And now let's look at our Hydrogen app. You can see we're on the catalog page, but it doesn't really matter because the layout component with the header is on every single page. So if I just click Hydrogen here, we go back to the root domain. It looks the same. And you can see here now that all that default styling, including lists and links, has been removed. And even this icon here, which was a different color, has been transformed. Okay, so Tailwind gets rid of all that default styling that works in an old article, but doesn't work when we're styling a web app. Again, we can add it back in with this typography, which we'll do later in this class. Okay, so with that out of the way, we can actually close this down. The tutorial itself is going to show you how to add classes to the Hello World project, but we've got our own project here, and we've got the help of Tailwind CSS here, the documentation, so we can literally look up anything we want to do here in the documentation. All right, so going back to the app here and going into our code base, I'm going to close down this, and let's zoom out to a normal size. Go over here, and let's start with the highest level component, which would be the layout component. So if I go into my components here and go into layout.server.jsx, you can see here this is where we store our header. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to start where we define our first class name. So here you can see container, and because I've got the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension installed, I can see here what styles it's applying based on this container class. Now, if you don't have that installed yet, which if you're new to Tailwind CSS, you probably don't, all you got to do is look it up in the extensions right here. So as you can see, I've got Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. I'll show a screen share right now on your screen of how I installed that. It's very simple. You just go into the extension search box, search for that extension, then hit install. Very simple. All right, I'll close that down. Head back into our layout.server.jsx file, and then I'll switch over here, open up my developer tools by hitting Option Command I on a Mac. Let's open up this a little bit more. It's a bit tight. And then let's have a look at the header. I'm going to go over here to the class container, and as you can see here, depending on the screen width, we'll have a different max width on our container. So if I go down to here so that the screen is wider, you can see that our max width is 1280, and so it's restricting the content in here. Now, what we want as well as max width is to center this container and give it a bit of padding. And we can actually add in these extra styles to the container class via the config file. Now, what we could do instead is we could just simply go into everywhere where there's container and add in some Tailwind utility classes. Like for instance, we can do MX auto to give it the auto margin. You can see here as I hover over it, that's what it's going to do. And then we can also do the PX with a 4 next to it to give padding left and right of 1 rem, which as you can see here in the comment, I can't hover over it, otherwise it'll disappear. But you can see 1 rem is approximate to 16 pixels unless you change your HTML font sizing. Okay, so if I hit save on that, now you can see our container is in the center of the screen, which is what we want from a container. But the problem with it is that we're going to have to go through the entire project and put MX Auto and PX4 in front of every container. Instead of doing that, we can actually modify the container class by extending it inside the tailwind.config.js file. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit save so it goes back to what it was before. We do have a container, but it's snapping to the left side of the page. So what we're going to do is go into our tailwind.config.css file. And then inside the theme object, I'm going to create a new object that's equal to the class name, which is container. Open that object up and then add center true and padding 1 rem. I'll hit save on that, refresh over here, and you can see we get the same result, and we don't need to add in those classes every time that we have that container class referenced, which is actually a few times in the project. Now, of course, I've done this before, so I knew how to do that. But for you guys starting out with Tailwind CSS, how I figured that out was simply by searching the documentation. So you can type in literally container, click on this item, and now you're on the page for container. You can see the class and what it gives you, but then also you can scroll down and see how to customize it in your Tailwind config.js file. So as you can see here, I combined these two, the center of true and the padding of, for us it was 1 rem, not 2 rem, and it's got some more examples on here as well. So all of the theory that I'm operating on here is coming from the Tailwind documentation. So anytime you're stuck here, guys, just go to the Tailwind documentation. I'm going to keep coming back to this documentation to hammer it home. But basically, this documentation is very comprehensive, and this search feature is very powerful, powered by Algolia. So you can just search whatever you want in here, and it's pretty good at searching the documentation. Okay, so if we go back here, we've got our containers now configured. The next one is header inner. So there was styling applying to header inner in my original CSS, but of course we have removed all of the CSS. So now what we're going to do is replace that header inner with Tailwind classes. Okay, so we can get out of this now. We can go back to here, and instead of header inner, we can add some Tailwind classes like flex, which if we hover over it, you can see we'll give it a display style of flex. Then we can write items center. And as you can see here, we've got autocomplete coming up because we've got the extension installed. And I can, if I'm not sure which one, I can toggle through them to see which one I'm looking for. Items center is the one for aligning the items in the center. For Flexbox, I'm going to put justify between to get justify content space between. And then PY, the P representing padding, and then Y representing the Y axis, so the vertical axis. And then the number here determines the amount, which is listed in rem. And then we can step through, and we can also have a look at the comments to figure out how much that's going to be in pixels. So I'm going to use PY4 here to get 16 pixels of padding top and bottom. I'm going to hit save on that and then refresh over here. And you can see we've got a little bit of work to do, but you can see now that we've got this here and then the menu items in the middle. Let's fix up the rest of this header. So if I go down here and work on the child elements within this, what used to be header inner, I can go into header logo here now, replace that with some Tailwind CSS classes to get the same result. So I'm going to type font bold to give it a bold font. And then I also want to change the font family. So at this point, let me actually look up how to do that in the documentation so you can see how we go about learning how to use Tailwind CSS. Okay, so let me go into here and search font family. Here it is. We can use these standard classes, font sans, font serif, and font mono to get these default configurations out of the box. We can read more about how this works. It's very well documented. But if we want to create our own font families, we can go in here and update the tailwind.config file. We can do this in array format or just in comma delimited format. So let's do that right now. I'll go into my tailwind.config.js file and open up a font family object inside of themes. I'll put this after container. Make sure there's a comma there. And then inside here, let's define a new font family. Here they've got the examples of display and body. I think we're going to call this one logo because it's going to only affect the logo, I'm pretty sure. And then we can put in our array of font families. So if you're familiar with CSS, the first one in the list is what will get loaded first. If it can't find it, then it defaults to the next one, and then it defaults to the next one, and just goes down the list until a font is found. So we're going to do Veranda, then Geneva, then Tahoma. Then if it can't find any of those, we'll just go to a standard sans serif. Okay, I'll hit save on that. And then we should be able to use it now by going into here and typing font logo. If I hit save on that, refresh back on our app here, and I right click to inspect the logo, you can now see that we have font logo, and that's bringing in the list of font families that we specified in the config file. Moving on to the next section, we've got our header navigation here. And so if I remove the CSS style and put in Tailwind utility classes, we're going to start off with flex for display flex. We're going to make sure the items are centered, align items centered, justify around, which will produce justify content space around, list none, which is redundant here because this styling has already been removed for us when we install the base directive. I'm going to expand this here a bit. We don't need to see the Explorer at this point. And then here I want to do another font. I'll do it the other way around this time. I'm going to put font nav, and then I'll go into my Tailwind config file here and add in one called nav. And for this one, we're going to start with circular Helvetica new, spelled like that, then Helvetica, then Arial, and then if none of those are available, sans serif. Okay, if I hit save on the config file and I hit save over here, and then have a look at our nav here, inspect, let's have a look, it should be this one right here. We should now see that font family coming across. If we don't set that, you'll see the default looks a little different. Okay, but we're not done yet. We got one more to do, and that's gap 3, which will add an approximate 12 pixel gap in between items. So if I hit save on that, now you can see there's a gap in between these. Moving down on our header even further, what else have we got? We've got header cart link. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that, and then again replace with Tailwind CSS classes, flex, items, center, justify end, which will put justify content at flex end. I'm going to do font nav, which we already created in the config just before, and then give it a gap of 3. Hit save on that. And we still can't see it, and that's because I believe the SVG doesn't have any height or width. So what we're going to do is go into the actual SVG and add class name here. Remember, this is JSX, so we can't put class in. We have to put in class name. And then I'm going to put in these utility classes, W6 and height 6, to get an approximate 26 by 26 icon. And now you can see it's right there. Now there's one other element here that we can't actually see until we have an item in the cart. It might be hard to add an item to the cart when we haven't styled anything. Let me just do it right now. Yeah, this looks terrible because we haven't styled it, but here you can see it should function, but you can see here we've got this 1 that shows up next to the cart icon. So I just need to provide some styling for that. I'm going to go back to our home page. That should stay there. And then here we can look at the cart bubble component, which is basically this span right here. That's the extent of the JSX. So I'll add in class name, and here we can put in some Tailwind CSS classes. I'm going to put in relative for position relative, negative top 1, and text SM. Okay. If I hit save on that and then I hover over these, you can see the exact styling that it's applying to this span. So we're going to have position relative, we're going to have a top of around negative 4 pixels, and we're going to decrease the font size. Okay, now if I refresh over here, we should start to see it pop up a little bit over there. All right, so we've just got this home page here left to go. So let's open up our index.server.jsx file here, and we've already stripped the CSS, so we've got no styling for home-page. We just need to replace it with Tailwind. So I'm going to go in here after container, and I'm going to throw in some Tailwind CSS, PT for padding top, flex for display flex, items center for align item center, justify center for justify content center, flex col for flex direction column. And then what I'm going to do is, actually I won't do it yet, I'll just show you what we have so far. So we'll go over here and you can see home page is there. It's a H1, but as I mentioned before, Tailwind have stripped all the styling. So we can add that back in. We can add standard like article styling with the prose class here, which is a class that gives us all of this. And so if I hit save and refresh over here, our heading 1 looks a lot more like a top level heading. And then if we were to go in here and write paragraphs, I think we can just type in lorem ipsum, there we go, using Emmet. Let's do another paragraph of lorem ipsum. Hit save on that. You'll see it comes up nicely in sort of an article format. And if we did like list items, this should show up nicely as well. Let me go back and do 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. You'll see the list shows up kind of nicely as well. It's all centered in the middle. We can, of course, modify this, but we get this standard prose styling if we use the prose class. And that's what, remember I mentioned, I'll just get rid of that stuff. Remember I mentioned in the tailwind.config.js file, that's what the typography package allows us to do within Tailwind. Okay? Now, if we go back to what we were looking at here in the index and on the layout.service.jsx, you can see here that our menu is not exactly centered in the middle of our viewport here. And what we can do to fix this is to put in some min width, max width, and just width arbitrary values for these different parts that make up our header. How we do arbitrary values in Tailwind is via square brackets. So if I was to go in here, I want to set a min w. You can see the list of Tailwind classes that we can use. We can create a min width 0, full for 100%, min content, max content, and fit content. But what we want to do here is put in a min width of 33.33% of the available space so that it's exactly 1/3. So what I'm going to do is put in a square bracket here, do 33.33%. We can put in this as pixels, as viewport width. We can put in whatever value we want here as long as we open up these square brackets, and Tailwind will create that class for us on the fly. It's a pretty damn cool feature. All right, so here I want to set a max width, so max W, and as you can see for max width, there's a whole bunch of other options within Tailwind. You've got XS, small, medium, large, going up to 7XL, and of course full. But again, we want to do an arbitrary value here, so I'm going to open up square brackets, 33.33%, and then over here I'm just going to do a width of 33.33%. And so when we're looking at our project on a bigger screen like this, it should be centered. Okay, so we've got a bit of an issue here. Let me have a look. We've got our min width here. I put it on the wrong element here. I was supposed to put that here. Okay. And if we go back here, you can see that our menu in the center is now centered. And if I expand this to be wider or tighter, you can see it stays in the middle. Okay, so that was a good example of using arbitrary values. So we've seen a few of the concepts within Tailwind already, and soon I'll just go off and build out the rest of our project using these Tailwind classes. But I want to show you another feature before I move on and build out the rest of our project, which I naturally gravitated towards when I started building with Tailwind. Okay, so what it involves is we can go into our index.css file here, and we can actually extend Tailwind to create our own CSS classes, combining some of the Tailwind CSS utility classes. So as you can see here, we've got our 3 directives here: base, components, and utilities. This is hopefully self-explanatory. So you've got our base level CSS, components, and utilities on top of that. I don't think it's particularly a deal breaker if you get these wrong, but we need to choose one of them to layer on top of. So for example, something that you would probably put in base, I will put in this directive of layer and then put base and then open that up. Something like setting the background color of main. So I'm going to change that now. Going to set that to FA, 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 FC. Okay. And then now if we go over here, you can see that our main section has a slight grayness to it. Sorry, it's up here. And as you can see, we've added in our own CSS to the main element, okay? But what's more interesting than that is if we go into here to our custom built components, let's build some classes here that resemble what the project was originally, but instead of using just regular styling, we're going to apply multiple Tailwind CSS utility classes to create our own class. Okay, so remember when we removed some of these classes over here, that were quite semantic, like header inner, header logo, header navigation. Well, we can actually go and bring these back by creating our own classes over here. And the way we do that is, let's just say, let's define header inner, okay? And what we can do here is we can take these Tailwind CSS utility classes, we can cut that here, replace this with header inner, so taking it back to what it was before. And then over here, we put in the directive of apply, and then we paste in those Tailwind CSS classes. And then if I hit save on both of these files and head back over here, you'll see that it looks exactly the same. So now we can go through and refactor. So this one used to be called header navigation. So I'm going to cut this, call this header navigation, head over here, create header navigation, write apply here, and paste in all those Tailwind CSS classes. Okay, heading back here, you get the exact same result. So it's a matter of personal preference here, but I actually like to remove a lot of these utility classes. It tends to get a little messy if you have a lot of them. Like if we go back to the official Shopify tutorial and we look at some of the examples here, some of the code examples. Let's have a look at like featured collections. You start to see a lot of these Tailwind CSS classes. Like this one is just hectic, right? So it's a personal preference. I don't like to have the class name attribute filled with so many different classes. And the way you can clean up your HTML or your JSX a little bit is by putting these into a single class and then using the class name there. So that's what I'm going to do for the rest of this tutorial. Okay, so to finish up on the layout section over here, I'm going to grab this. This used to be called header cart link. So let's create that class using Tailwind. I'll go down here, header cart link, and I just need to put apply in front of it. Hit save, and we get the exact same result. Now, before we continue on styling the rest of our app here, I want to front load a lot of the Tailwind features that I think are the most exciting and important. And one of the coolest features is pseudo classes and responsive styles. So I'll give you an example of how we can do pseudo classes in Tailwind CSS. I'm going to go into the layout.server.jsx file here, and I'm going to add class names to these three links in our navigation. So class name, open these up, and what I'm going to do is use the color scheme. So I'll type this out first and then I'll show you where this lives in the documentation. But one of the cool features of Tailwind is these color schemes. So I can take advantage of this slate color scheme and then I can choose which shade I want. So I'm going to make the font color this 600 value of the slate palette. Saving that and heading back over to our page here, you can see we've changed the color of these menu items. This slate with the value here is a color, and the part after text here, the first part represents the color scheme, and then the second part relates to the shade from the color scheme. So if I go back into the documentation here of Tailwind CSS and I search for color, let's go have a look at text color. There's a part on the documentation where it shows the color schemes. I have it somewhere in my search history. Here it is, customizing colors. And you can see here different palettes. So as you can see here, the lower the number, the more faded it is. And then the higher the number, the more dark it is. And you can do this with so many different colors. Slate actually is not in here because I'm actually looking at the wrong documentation, I'm afraid. It's showing me Tailwind version 2. If I go to this one, it'll take me to the version 3. And then if I type in colors, hopefully we find slate in here. There's the slate example. And how do we find the color schemes here? Color, customizing colors. Let's try that. Yeah, and as you can see here, we've got the version 3.2.1 documentation on the different color palettes. Not color schemes, sorry, color palettes, they call it. So you've got these color palettes. As you can see, Slate 50 is quite white and Slate 900 is quite black. It's very similar to gray, almost exactly the same, but slightly different. And then you've got all these different color palettes. So if you choose a particular color palette and then you just choose different shades, then you can ensure that you've got consistency in the colors of your design, which is really cool, especially as a developer. I don't have the skills to go off and create color palettes, so having Tailwind CSS to make it easier for me to stick with the same color palette is really cool. So that's a little explainer into what we're doing here with the text Slate 600. And with that in mind, I want to show you the Pseudo class that I was mentioning before. So if we were doing standard CSS, we couldn't put a hover class in line. We would have to put that in our CSS. So we would have to go, let's just say, header navigation UL LI A to target the links. And then we would have to go hover here and then put in our hover style. But we actually can do this in line in our JSX inside our HTML with Tailwind, which is really cool. So all we got to do for that is we go into here. I'm going to duplicate my cursor 3 times. And here all we do is hover, colon, and then we put in the appropriate Tailwind CSS utility class that we want to apply on hover. So in this instance, I'm going to put in text Slate and choose a darker shade, so 800. I'll hit save on that. And then if I hover over here, you can see the shade is changing. And we did all of that without having to resort to writing anything in the CSS file. We can just write it in line in our JSX, which is super cool. I want to go ahead and do this on our header cart link as well, so it behaves the same. We've got a custom class for that, so I can add those next to the apply directive, and that'll just add to our existing class. As you can see, it's a slight difference, but there is a difference there on hover. And then the final feature that I think is really important to show you guys is the responsive styling, which I don't really have a use case for on this particular page. But if we go into the catalog route, you can see that actually it doesn't look too bad, but we obviously want this to show up in a grid. These images are too big. So what we'll do next is we'll put this all into a grid, and then we will update the grid based on the screen size. And I can show you how we use Tailwind to do that in line as well. We don't need to use media queries. Tailwind simplifies this for us, and it's actually one of my favorite features of Tailwind. All right, so let's jump into it. I'm going to continue on with this style of using our own custom classes, but then creating these classes using Tailwind still. So what I'm going to do is, I think we're done here with the layout.server, the cart.bubble, and the index.jsx. We're done with this config file as well. Definitely want to keep the index.css file open, but let's move on to the catalog page. And right here you can see we've got our container class and we've got our catalog page class. But then under here we've got product grid class. So of course we can replace this with Tailwind CSS utility classes, but instead I'm going to rebuild this class in our index.css using Tailwind CSS. And so what I'm going to do, product-grid, open this up, and then I will apply display grid via just the word grid, grid cols 3, which will create a 3-column layout. Very simply, I'm going to have a 12 pixel gap in between rows and columns. And for the rows, we've got 9 coming across, so a 3x3 grid seems to be the right choice. I'll hit save on that, refresh over here, and look how quickly we got this beautiful grid going, and it's fully responsive, moves with our container. Okay, but then if I go like this to simulate a mobile screen, it's getting a bit crowded. So what I want to do is change the number of columns on mobile. Now how I can do that is I can go here, and how it works is it's a mobile first layout. So how the breakpoints work is you choose a breakpoint and then the class is applied to everything above that breakpoint rather than everything below that breakpoint. I'll show you what I mean right now. So what I'm going to do first is put SM colon in front of grid cols 3. I'll hit save. Now you can see that that layout has reverted to a single column layout, but on a certain screen size, it will be 3 columns, okay? And we can actually look at this if we go into the grid, click on it here, you'll see the min width for SM is 640 pixels, right? So this setting for 3 columns is only going to affect screen sizes over 640. All right, so if we go down here, you'll see that that disappears. So therefore, to affect screen sizes below 640, all we got to do is put in grid cols and let's say 2 on smaller screen sizes, hit save. Now you can see by default we've got a 2 column layout, and then if we expand to a bigger screen past 640 pixels, we've got 3. So we've got media queries right out of the box with Tailwind, and all we have to do is put in these breakpoints in front of these utility classes in order to tell Tailwind to apply that class to only screen sizes above that breakpoint. All right, so that is another really cool feature of Tailwind CSS. All right, so with that out of the way, those are the main features I wanted to show you regarding Tailwind CSS. I could go through the entire project and refactor the entire code with Tailwind, which is what I have done behind the scenes. But as I was going through this project, I didn't find any more cool features, apart from, of course, using prose on the article pages. So if you put the prose class on the article pages, I might just even do that now for you guys. So just put in prose here, and then suddenly you've got a very nicely formatted article. So using the prose class from that typography package and putting it on articles or pages that just showcase content and not complex layouts, that is a really cool feature. But otherwise, the things I love about Tailwind are, number one, how we set up that grid was so easy. We just said, give us a 3 column grid, and it did. I love how simple that was. I love how simple the responsive styles are with these breakpoints. I love that they have color schemes right out of the box. I love that we can put in our own arbitrary values. And so as you're probably gathering, I'm a pretty big fan of Tailwind CSS, and I'm actually keen to continue using it. Obviously, Shopify recommends it, so I think it's a good technology to learn. But yeah, I will leave the rest of the project for you guys. If you want to go through and recode this storefront using Tailwind, I highly encourage you to do that. That can be your little project to learn Tailwind and gain some practice. But otherwise, I'm going to call it there. All right, so there you go, guys. Tailwind CSS with Shopify Hydrogen. Even though this video is kind of long already, we've only just scratched the surface of what is possible with Tailwind. Personally, I've become a big fan of Tailwind after using it for the first time in preparation for this video. I like how the framework seems to nudge me towards using a design system where I can take advantage of, different shades of a single color scheme, and it just helps me to stay consistent when it comes to padding and margins too. If you'd like to view the completed project with the completed Tailwind CSS code, you can do so by checking out the completed code with Tailwind branch on the public repository for this project. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. Please comment below with your thoughts on Tailwind CSS and let me know what you'd like to see in the next video. Happy coding, and I'll see you on the next one.